Hello, lovely people in Chelmsford. For those of you, my art friends who know me, welcome to my studio, and it's lovely to reconnect with you this way. If you don't know me yet, my name is Susan Clare. I'm a painter. I work in mixed media, watercolour and acrylics. I teach workshops, I do demos for art clubs, I have an online painting club, and of course I sell artwork. The inspiration from my work is the environment and the natural world, and that stems from my first career in scuba diving. So of course the environment and the underwater world were always really important to me, and the idea of protecting them is still foremost in my expression in my art. So the idea is to connect people, or the viewers of my art, with the natural world, and in doing so help them to be more aware of the need for their protection and the part that they can play quite simply in improving the lot of the environment. So at the moment I'm sitting in my studio in Jamaica, and that might sound very exotic, but my first career was in scuba diving, and that brought me to Jamaica, so I have a home here. And I was lucky enough to be able to spend some time living back in Chelmsford, which is close to where I'm from 2013 until COVID-19. So during that time, I was a full and active member of Chelmsford Art Society, and that was an absolute pleasure to be so involved with all of you lovely people. I know we have some new members, so I'm just going to give you a bit of my background so that you understand where I'm coming from and why I'm sitting here. So welcome to my studio in Jamaica. I'm going to give you a little tour in a second and a look at my view, and then I think you'll be able to understand why I'm kind of happy to be sitting out my time in isolation on this hilltop and hopefully staying safe from COVID, as I hope all of you are too. So thank you for the opportunity of sharing this demo with you, and please enjoy. So welcome to my studio. It's a very messy work desk and some cutting area, an easel, some art on easels over here. I don't have much wall space, so I do tend to put my finished pieces on easels, and the walls are all taken up with other things. Some larger pieces over this side. And I'd love to invite you to take a look at my view, which I'm sure you can understand is one of the reasons why I'm happy to stay here in Jamaica during lockdown. So I have lots of lovely lights coming in from my studio over this side. The entire wall is doors. And here's my view. So I'm looking out over the southern mountains, and then over this way towards the west to have a view of the sunset, and goes on around. We're right up on a mountaintop, so I'm very lucky, and it keeps me inspired. And there's lots of stuff in my garden that goes on. When you look out, it looks almost entirely green, and that's because it is so lush here. But in between all the greenery, of course, there's lots of lovely flowers, and we have a couple of ponds. So I'm going to invite you to share some of the views now as I go through the garden. I have a couple of ponds on the property. This is the one I call pond number 1 because we built it first. And just looking at the natural stone on the landscape, filled in a portion of it, and got 2 different types of papyrus in the background there. This is a plant I'm really fond of, this Cycad. It's one of the ancient types of plants like horsetails and so on that were around when the dinosaurs were, before deciduous trees became a thing. Has the most amazing flower or fruiting body in the centre there. Give a sense of scale. And looking up at the palm trees. These yellow flowers are a big magnet for hummingbirds. They're yellow shrimp plants, one of my favourites. They're on the approach to, well, there's a hummingbird, you can hear him, onto my pond number 1. Just looking across my pond and into the forest behind, and then moving up through the trees. I think when I was doing some demos for you before, I've mentioned it's not very often you see large patches of sky. I think at this point you can understand why, because it's all just trees. These tea plants are some of my favourites. I love this pink colour. Another palm tree is going to flower soon with those pods on either side of the trunk. And moving down we come to some more of the shrimp plants, flowering yellow. Here's a close-up view of the pond. My garden's full of little walkways on different levels, so you can usually view things from a couple of different places. Just down from the pond is my pineapple patch. You can see some growing here. I've painted these heliconias several times, and when I describe this, when I'm in England doing a demo on these, I always have to describe how the flowers are at about eye level, but the leaves go on up above your head for several feet. And there are the tall trees behind. Underfoot I have lots of limestone, boulders, and moss, fallen leaves. Yesterday we had our first rain for a month, so some of these things are looking very dried and have dried up brown leaves attached to them. These things here are called pandanus grasses, and they're growing quite big. I love the red and green, the yellow and green stripes on the leaves. They have the most amazing root systems. I'm looking for a vista to paint, and part of me is wanting to do a lovely view through the tree trunks. These lianas and vines hanging down off the trees are quite spectacular. I'm always intrigued by them. There's a few different types of heliconias. These ones are called cigars. I think you can see why. There's another different one down there that has similar red and yellow, but it has green bits sticking out all over. And here are some more cigars. The cigar ones have amazingly different leaves, kind of almost bluish compared to the others. Here's another flower that I've painted a few times. The scale of these blooms is quite difficult to visualise. They're at least a foot long. So pretty, and the bees love them. They're called Medinilla. Here's another tree I'm fond of, the datura, or angel bells. I have the peach version, and these trumpets are about 9 inches long. Their fragrance in the evening is like the best perfume you've ever smelled. And it wafts on the breeze across the deck, and it's absolutely amazing. underneath is so interesting. These white begonias are something I tend to take for granted. They grow almost everywhere and all over everything you don't want them to sometimes. But they have a fresh, clean scent that makes the whole garden smell amazing. This is a thatch palm, which I planted when we built the house as a little 2 foot high something. And I'm just amazed at the way the little fronds interweave. So it was the subject of my painting, Interwoven. Amazing intense colours in this flower from the bromeliad. Here's pond number 2, which is quite a lot deeper than the first one. And it has a nice deep pink lily growing in it. There's one that's just about to bloom there. At a shady sitting spot under the thatch palm, which gives me a nice view through the garden. It's the yellow pandanus grasses and the heliconia patch. Here's a cacao plant, a cocoa plant, and they like to grow in the shade. So there's more heliconias behind there. Here's where we get chocolate from. A lovely cocoa pod. It's almost ready to pick. At this point, deep in my garden, we're back in sort of native forest, and I'm going to show you one of my best kept secrets. We have a cave on the property, and the cave is filled with stalactites and stalagmites. This is the entrance of the cave. It actually goes way on down, about 60 feet and 100 feet in underneath the earth. And it has some amazing history to do with the Taino Indians, who probably used it for some kind of ceremonial site. I'm underneath a mango tree, and here's one of my little friends, hummingbird. It's one of the doctor birds. Jamaica's national bird. His streamer tails are just beginning to grow back, so he's a male. This is lemongrass, used to make tea, also called fever grass, and good for keeping away mosquitoes. So we have it planted in a lot of places in our garden. And here's one of my favourite leaves, Monstera, sometimes known as Swiss cheese plant. I can remember having one in my bedroom as a teenager and having to coax it so carefully to grow. And these ones we really have to keep up with cutting back, just so you can get an idea of the size. Here's my hand. And these have the most amazing fruiting bodies, which are actually edible at a certain point. They taste like strawberry. But if you eat them at the wrong time, they will fill your mouth with prickles. So you have to know when. Here's another bromeliad in my front garden. And we have an old copper here that's become a little pond for lilies. These are leftover equipment from the sugar industry from years and years ago. I love these lilies because they bloom all day. Purple with yellow centres. Hello again. So I have prepped my canvas ready to paint a scene with the lovely Medinilla or Medinilla flowers. And I've added a load of natural texture from my garden. I found some pieces of trash coming off the bark of the bananas and coconuts, and I've pulled it all apart and added it into the surface here, into a thick layer of gesso, which has given me some interesting crackle look. And that's the surface of my 16 by 20 inch painting on the canvas. So here you can see that the texture layer has been quite effective. I've put on a base coat of a light green colour, which is not a very good quality paint, as you can see, but I think it won't matter because we're going to be covering up most of it. These are the kind of paints that I'm going to be using for the next section. Mostly they're liquid text, the heavy body variety. This medium magenta is one of them, and I have laid out a lot in my palette already. I've got a cadmium yellow, a couple of different greens, a phthalo green, phthalo turquoise, light blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine, dioxazine purple or deep violet, and that is a perylene magenta. Now this lovely light magenta, medium magenta is going in here, and of course some titanium white, and that is going to complete my range of colours. I'm going to add a little yellow ochre as well, that's always handy. My setup today also includes some Liquitex flat brushes. I have the long handled ones and the short. These are 2 inches, a 1 inch, and a De La Rowney acrylic brush 3/4. On my station I also have a water container, some regular kitchen paper towel, and a little repurposed spray bottle just filled with water to try to keep my palette a little more moist when it starts to get sticky. I've got my reference picture up above where I'm working, and I'm going to try and post this in the corner of the screen for you so you can watch it at the same time. So these gorgeous pink flowers are called Medinilla or Medinilla. I just have one plant of this growing in my garden. It was a gift when I moved here from a neighbour, and it is really hard to propagate. We've been trying ever since, which was more than 12 years ago, and every time we try and circumpose it, it's a miserable failure. So I don't know if it's our fault or if the plant's just tricky, but I'm very, very grateful for the beautiful blooms that it's been giving us. So I've dampened my brush in the water. I'm not going to soak it. We want to keep the colours fairly stiff. And I know that most of you know Hashim Akib's work, and I learnt a lot from him. So if my style looks like it's progressing in that direction, it's quite likely. And of course, I'm very grateful to him for everything that I've learnt from him. So I'm going to be dipping into a couple of different colours to make the combination of pink that I'm starting with to be a little bit more exciting than just plain old pink. So a little bit of cobalt blue, ultramarine, maroon, and a teeny bit of yellow ochre. I want this to be a fairly dull colour. We'll work up to the brights. I just want to be able to block in where the pinks are going, which areas are where the flowers are lurking. So just turning the paint over a couple of times to blend it a little. You'll notice that I have placed most of the texture and this arching kind of pattern, which is going to reinforce hopefully where the flowers are lying. And so adding just plain brush strokes onto this textured surface, you can see that we start to see the texture immediately when you add another colour. And so what I'm looking to do today is not to reproduce a very lifelike rendition of the Medinilla blooms, because the texture doesn't lend itself to that. It's going to make it, or force me to work in a slightly more abstract way than I would normally be comfortable with, and that is deliberate. Left to my own devices, I would probably get overworked in detail quite easily and drift off into that for hours. So at the moment I want to try to get the pink in between the textures, because this is my base colour pink and I'm going to be adding to it. So I'm not worrying about whether these are the right shapes for the flowers. I'm just going to block them in where I see them and add a little bit more white into the mixture this time, a little blue and touch of green along with yellow, just to take off the brightness of the pinks, and we'll continue working. I see where I need some landmarks to just sort of guide me as to where this bloom is dropping down and where it starts and stops, so that this doesn't become one big blob of dull dark pink. We're going to add in some of the other, mix another pink into it. Some of the challenges of working in a studio like this in Jamaica is that it's getting quite hot these days. So one of the things about the house where I'm living is that we have a very intentional policy of not creating a large footprint, carbon footprint, so we don't have any air conditioning. Almost entirely all of our power, electrical power, now comes from the solar panels on our roof. Solar water heater has been here since we built the house. So yeah, the last thing we need is to start going into air conditioning. Although since we have got the power from the sun, it probably wouldn't be such a terrible thing, but I don't really want to start to need air conditioning. So dependent on the whim of the breezes, and when we've been having a lot of rain this week. I know when I started doing the bits of video for the garden, it was really thirsty for rain, so the garden's been very grateful. I've been quite grateful, but it does mean that we start to get more mosquitoes and stickiness in the afternoons. Just picking up some more of those same colours to repeat what I'm doing. I have a tendency to let my brush get a bit too sparse on paint, so I'm aware that I need to refill more often than this, my natural tendency. Okay, so I picked this green for the background partly because it's going to satisfy some of the needs of filling in background for me. This piece, okay, I need to work out where some of these branches are. Even if it's the wrong colour, I just want to know that that branch is going that way. It's coming down here, and then we have some nice big leaves coming down here. So my little drop of pink that's out in the open is going to land about here. It's not very pink at the moment, but we'll lighten it up later with some whites and pinks. Just plotting things out at the moment. So when Chris asked me to do this demo for you, she gave me a few parameters and just because I'd done several for you before, she didn't want me repeating myself at all. So I was charged with finding a scene in the garden that was not just flowers. It needed to be more of a scene than just flowers. It needed to be not all green, quote. And of course that is quite a challenge. As those of you that heard me talk about my garden before will know that that's one of the reasons that I paint flowers so close up, is because a lot of the time when you just look out on the view, you have a hard time finding them between all of the greenery, which is gorgeous and abundant, but sometimes can feel a bit overwhelming. Just going to move that pink over a bit more. I think that's the beauty of acrylics. Of course, you can decide that something was put in the wrong place and just change it without too much fuss. So we'll put a little bit more pinkiness there. And this little one drop down. I'll probably find myself exaggerating the size of these flowers just a little bit. Can't help it because they do grab attention so well. but I also want to make sure I get in this sense of perspective and distance with the stepping stones going up and leading to the path. We've got some rockery kind of edging to the flower beds on this side. I think you may have heard me talk about my garden. It's not like you have any expansive lawn to have flower beds around. The land is basically a 45-degree drop for most of the way, with some parts changing a little from that. So the trick to getting to plant anything is to create these raised beds, and then so we build up the wall on one side, which becomes level with the ground at the far side, so that you can contain the soil. And then as you move on down the property, we ended up with creating lots of little walkways and paths between these levels. So it's actually quite magical going through there in a sort of a... Reminds me of Never Neverland when I was little, that we used to go to on the seafront at Southend, Westcliff. Where you would walk along the paths, and then there was another entire scene would just pop itself up at you without warning, and you'd find Hansel and Gretel or Goldilocks or something like that standing in front of you. Of course, they're all very tame compared to what you have at Disneyland and stuff nowadays, but in my day that was really exciting. Okay, so there is a bed of flowers that runs down here in the background, and the steps go up here behind the rest of this texture work. So I'm going to actually hint at those by just putting them in a dark colour. So I'm just picking up a little blue, not cleaning my brush or anything, a little purple. And this is just really to plan out where the darks are going to be and where we're looking through to in that. This is the texture of the real dark Bomanthea vine, which grows up along the edge of the house and hides some of the pipes. It does have the most gorgeous glossy dark green leaves, and it has the enormous white flowers occasionally, but because of the position of where it is on my house, it doesn't bloom too often. So I'm just putting those in with a real dark purpley colour, just adding a little bit of dark phthalo green into that so that we can suggest that. I'm just using this kind of stenciling movement to get the colour to go in between the textured marks. I want when we come to the top layer, that's where I'm going to make the most of exploiting that texture, and that's when the last marks will sit on top of the layer beneath. So although it might be nice to have a few bits of the original colour peeking through like here, I don't want that to be the main thing at this stage. We'll exploit that later, hopefully. So here are my steps coming down. So this is getting closer and closer. Steps and the rockery will be sort of there. And the edge of this step, I've made that come out too far, is going to, Bomanthea comes up under this bloom. And that will be kind of the edge of the walkway there, and it sort of steps in a bit, comes down, just plotting this. So we're running into this other bloom here, and then we have a little bit where it sticks out further over here, and then continues on down the slope of the garden. So we have a ditch that's carrying some water that's running behind this slope and the steps. So it has some lovely dark red plants that grow in there to hide the waterway. So those are kind of going to give me a lovely dark background there behind these leaves and flowers. And the great thing about that area also is that, as well as the dark green, I think it's called Jacob's coat plants with lovely red leaves, above that we have some light green and with yellow blooms, little shrimp plants. So although you can't really make them out in the reference picture too well, I know that they're there. And I may actually bring in a few yellows to contrast with the pinks and magentas. Of course, there's method in the madness to choosing this background colour, as it is a sort of a diametric opposite to the magenta that is the basis for the pink flowers. Okay, so we have our line of fall on the rockery. Let's come down and meet the ground here. So I'm just going to put in some real darks back here. I just touched my brush into the water because the stickiness was getting a bit too much for me to really effectively get between these layers of texture. But now you can see where this is starting to be useful, as that's an appropriate place for the lighter texture to show through. And we've got some gaps between the foliage in this darker foliage area. So we'll just have a bit of fun blocking in some darks there. I'm going to just add some Perylene Maroon into that mixture, a little bit more purple, a bit more phthalo green, and some raw sienna, and turn those over together to give me a colour to block in some of the branches and pathways that the branches are taking. Now these I particularly thought I would follow with, if I could, some of the texture in the, this is the banana trash texture that I created on the surface before putting on the base coat layer. It's really strange what a difference it makes recording something like this for you live, with a recorded version instead of doing it live for you. Even when people may not be interacting, but the fact that you know that there's someone there watching and maybe get the odd bit of feedback or commentary makes a huge difference. It's much more like you're just in a void. So I've put in one directional branch line. I'm going to put in this lower one as well so that I don't lose my way. I have a map to follow. Part of the house is behind here, which creates a nice dark shadow against which to showcase this bloom. So since it is one of the main blooms, we'll just make sure that dark goes in there. Well, I'm sure that some of you are getting to start living slightly more normal lives at the moment. I know that some things are opening up a little bit in England. I hope that things don't get reverted too much with this Indian variant that's coming around. In case you're interested in how COVID is going here in Jamaica, we locked down very, very early and sort of had a complete blockade on people coming into the country, which worked for keeping the numbers low for about a year. But then we realised that everybody was going broke and starving. So out of necessity, borders were opened and some protocols put in place. And of course, some people will always find ways to break the rules. So we then found that we had a lot of cases arising. And some of them, it's not necessarily from tourism sector, it's things like call centres where people work in an enclosed environment, because of course most of us are outdoors a lot of the time, or you have a lot of fresh air blowing through places where people meet, so it's not such a problem. But when they are put together in an enclosed space, of course, then that's when problems arose. So we are somewhat behind England in terms of vaccination. I've had my first jab, had AstraZeneca. Of course, that's better for working here in the hot country. So it doesn't need the refrigeration that the Pfizer one does. And so we've got all of ups and downs of everybody comparing reactions and different pros and cons, which I suppose is normal. And yeah, so we are somewhat behind the rest of the world with getting our full vaccinations done. I just want to sort of get an idea of the scale of this big rock in the front here and the layered pieces. Actually, that's not big enough. This needs to come down a bit more. Something like that. Okay, this one. And of course the vertical patterns in the rocks. I have a nice fellow who lives just up the road from me, who's basically a stone napper with a K. And he's done a lot of all of this stonework for me, creating walls. I have a real knack for making dry walls out of nothing except stones here. They don't really need any mortar because they build them so that they lock into place and support each other as the structure's built up. So that's a lot of what we've got here, is that technique throughout the garden. In places where we've needed to add mortar, like creating the ponds, of course we do that. But he's about 80 years old and still works just as hard as ever. Interesting fellow. He's a bit of a Rastafarian, so he's got his own kind of philosophy of life. I'm grateful for his knowledge. Okay, so just to plan in now, I think this needs to be a little bit darker. May end up putting in that branch that comes across here just to break it up, we'll see. And I want to have an idea of where those stacking stones are lying. I don't want such a dark colour to mark those in. I'm going to pick up some white. When I pick up more colour, I tend to just add it into the side section of the previous colour. I'm not planning to change wash my brush at any point, just anytime soon. So these stepping stones need to be going away. They're pretty much in a straight line, but the size is where we're going to get the sense of proportion and distance. So we want to try and get them fairly accurate from the start. And it also tells us the lie of the land because of the way that the right hand side is much deeper, and on the left hand side the stones are actually flush with the landscape, the level. So here we go. That's sort of told us roughly where they are. And you can sort of start to get the feeling that things are drifting off in the distance. We've got some rather complicated steps to put in here as well, but I will do that in a little while. Just going to block that in a little bit to suggest the pathway. Where the stone wall continues on down, I'm just turning that over with a bit more raw sienna into the purple, which is giving me a nice grey. And so I'm going to just mark this in, a little bit more moisture on the brush to make it move a little more freely. That's better. So now I can plot these in here amongst. I want to use the kind of blocky brushwork that turns and twists as you come from one place to another. We've got these lovely big leaves to put in on the foreground here, but I just want to get an idea of that position of those colours there. I'll come back and do the leaves afterwards. Just block that in to start with and add the details afterwards, I think. There we go. Conveniently, the background colour is sort of giving me the sense of where the grass is growing. Okay, I'm going to change brushes now. I'm going to move to a short handled paddle brush so I can put more pressure on, and I'm just going to dampen that. So I'm going to be picking up larger quantities of paint now, dipping into my greens mixture and yellow, and turning those over on the section of my cardboard. This is horribly bright, so I'm going to dull it right down with some cobalt blue and some yellow ochre. I want it still quite streaky, but more generous paint, okay? And we'll see if we can get a sense of some of these leaves coming in here. I really don't want to paint every leaf individually. That's not what I'm after at all. But you can pick out one or two that have the right shape or angle, size to indicate what's happening with the leaves. Actually, we'll need to put those in back afterwards with some lights on them when we're catching the light. But in between here, just get the sense of all of these leaves. I need to be picking up a little bit of more paint at intervals to vary the colours and also to replenish so that I don't get a drying up brush. Just to be nice and generously loaded. There are some places where the sky's peeking through between the leaves at the top there, so I'm going to be adding that probably last, but just so that you realise it will be having some lights showing through. And for that reason I don't have to be very accurate with my leaf positioning, because when you cut in with the sky colour, that's really going to define them then. Going back into a bit more of the phthalo green to darken back up the leaf mixture again, and picking up raw sienna to go with that. So we've got a nice dull dark green for somewhere over here. That's a bit too, it needs to be more toned down. So we'll add some more yellow ochre and a little bit of perylene maroon. yellow ochre into the mixture, and burnt sienna. This is very olivey, the colours in the leaves over the side, so very olive green, covering up that one that's very much too phthalo. Phthalo is a very useful colour, but when you see it on its own, it's way too intense and acid-like for greenery, even here in Jamaica. And that's what I'm seeing a little bit too much of over here, so I need to add in some yellows into this mixture. Don't want to completely obscure the light greens, but I don't want them to be taking centre stage either. So we need to make them just poke out here and there. And then there's some, of course the texture in the surface here is going to do a lot of this work for me in terms of leading the eye through like a mesh of branches does. Okay, there's a bulge on the branch here, which is actually not part of the branch, it's the circumposed addition that where we're trying to get the branch to catch and grow some roots, so we can cut it off and replant it. Okay, so a bit more of the lighter green, muddy, olivey, lighter green colour now. We're going to pick up more yellow ochre, a bit of the ultramarine. Yellow ochre and ultramarine make a great greyish green. Bloom. These blooms are quite amazing. They are about 18 inches long when they're in full bloom. They take a while to extend down, so like some of these little ones are just starting and they'll get longer and longer and longer as each tier of the petals opens up, and then you've got more of the little flower. Well, I suppose those are sepals actually, leaf-like petals, so they're pink, and revealing the compound flowers underneath, which is where the bees will come to get the pollen. These shorter bristled brushes, I think it's much easier to get in between the texture when you need to. There's a little bit of white that's showing through there that we don't want. Outlining those. So we want to put in the darker green that just connects them. So yellow ochre straight into my green swatch, and ultramarine blue, bit of cobalt blue as well, and some of the greens that were left in there by accident. And that will give us a nice moody old green. Just above this bloom there's a lovely series of leaves which are showing us their shapes coming down like that. One of the things I've been doing since lockdown is teaching an online watercolour and water media club. The lessons are designed around requests that the members make, and I pre-record the classes and members can watch them in their own time and work on their projects. And then once a week on a Tuesday we come together and have a question and answer session, like a seminar. And it's been really fun because I've got people from England, several used to paint with me at Hoffs. I have people in Jamaica who have painted with me on and off over the years, and some new ones. And I have people from the States who have connected into the group in one way or another. So we've got all these different perspectives and it's really fun. Anyway, the reason I brought that up was because one of the little exercises, I also give them, as well as main projects that we paint, we also do in between exercises to strengthen skills and bring in new techniques and stuff like that. So one of the things that we did last summer was how to paint a leaf with one brushstroke. So we did a lot of work on that, which is coming in handy here, because if you can twist and turn the brush to create the illusion of a leaf and the shape of a leaf with just one mark, obviously it will stand you in good stead, and it makes the painting look a lot less fussy. Just looking at where this line actually connects up, about there. Needs to be a lot less thin than that. And okay, this can come down like that. So we've got some underneath there. All running in together a bit there, so trying to define that a bit better. If anyone's interested in the club, it's run on a, you don't sort of pay per class, you pay as a monthly membership, and you can choose which level of membership you want to follow me on, but the painting club is the top level, and it comes out it's 40 US a month, which is something like, it's less than £30 a month, and you get 2 full projects to do, 4 one-hour seminars, and a few other exercises, tips and other videos to go along with it. And it's hosted on Patreon. I'll give the link to Chris to share with you, but basically it's Patreon is spelled Patreon, patreon.com/my name, Susan Clare. And you'll find all the details there about what's involved. It's really fun having people support each other and get to be friends across the globe. It's really been fun in lockdown. In fact, some of the ladies who have been in the club have been quite isolated due to sickness of family members and so on, or their own pre-existing conditions. So they have actually said it's been like a lifeline to have something to focus on apart from the worries of COVID. So it's been great. I'm now looking to see above these flowers, there's another patch of leaves there. So the whole thing with this technique, I think, is to balance how much do we want to pay attention to the exact composition, and how much do we allow the texture that I've created to guide the way and make it more into a semi-abstract kind of piece. So this is probably we're approaching a point where that decisions like that will need to be made. There are some yellower greens. I've just picked up something called Green Gold, which is by Winsor and Newton, and it's an interesting colour. Just adding some yellow ochre into it too, and a little white, and some more green gold. So it gives us a very ochreish kind of greyish green. But you can see we've stepped up a bit lighter, and it's not as bright as the background green, but we'll just break this up a little bit with some of the like I said, at some point I'm going to have to let go of doing this slavishly, because the texture is not going to allow me to be too accurate with anything. But I think it'll be interesting. And you can see the vein very clearly. I don't know if you can hear, there's some nice pigeons cooing in the background. So it's only wood pigeons, you have those in England too. Quite often we get a lot of parrots and things like that, and they're very chatty, but I don't hear any of those at the moment. Scraping paint down closer on the edge of my brush there. There's some areas here where there's shadow across the grass, so we'll just run that in with some streaks there, in between the stepping stones. So we've only done the shadow side of the stepping stones, not the tops yet, so I mustn't get too enthusiastic about that. And get down into the shadow portion. Yeah. And some shadow is coming down here too, as the land drops off. I think that'll give us a bit more of a sense of contours. Some of these stones get very mossy because it's so moist, so there's always growth in between the stones. They're not often very clean to be seen as, you know, it is limestone, it's just limestone, but it's not often very bright white like you might expect. This area needs some breaking up, it's all much too solid in that same colour, so I'm picking up some of the green gold, just mixing that into what we already have on the palette there. It's probably going to be quite, I don't need to add any white or anything, it's going to be quite dark but a different colour, so we'll just break up some of these solidness here with bits of this more yellow toned backgroundish green. Between these blooms there's quite a lot of lightish greens, and then of course you can see the white of the house behind, or the creamy colour of the house. Don't necessarily want to have house in this picture, I wanted it really just to look like it was part of the garden, but we'll see how that goes. It's funny how little patches of background green that were there before didn't seem to bother me at all, but once you get to fill in the picture more, all of a sudden they look much too much out of place, so to go back and adjust. Hello again. So I have just had a little bit of a break to allow the paints here to solidify and set up a bit better. And I have cleaned out my water palettes and my brushes, and I'm going to step down a size to a smaller brush now. So I'm going to be picking up the medium magenta. Remember, this is a colour just made by Liquitex, and I'm going to add some white to that, and no other colours to introduce any blues or anything. So this will give us a purer pink. I want it still quite streaky, I don't want it to be a solid flat pink. And so we can see where this this brush has a better knife edge on it, so I can get some more detailed work in with this one. So we're going to just working with the texture here. If we get marks from the texture, I think this is time to start allowing those to show through the work, and that should make it quite interesting. So these top petals or sepals are a bit smaller than the others. So I do want to try and do just blocky brush strokes that take care of all the detail in one fell swoop. Because of the contouring of the texture, that may not be possible. But I do want to try to see if we can use the texture rather than just work around it all the time. I'm going to outline the stem a little bit so that we understand where it's going to. It's always needing to pick up more paint because the texture, it takes a lot of paint to get down in between all the grooves in order to make it look nice and juicy and chunky. This one has a dark stem running up there, but I'm going to put it in pink just so that I know that this is the flower stem and not another branch, okay? And we'll fix it up later as to what it's supposed to look like. So this one comes down here to mingle with its next door neighbour. Remembering that all of these colours will dry darker than they look when we put them on, so even though these colours look quite bright, they might still be not bright enough by the time they're dry. Just picked up a bit more white. See a lot more white on this side of this. Well, this is a case of if you get a mistake, in the normal way I would probably go back and fix it, but given that we're in a demo with a time constraint, it's always good to just be able to adapt the arrangement. And like I said, this is becoming more and more of an abstract version of these flowers rather than a botanical rendition. So I'll just keep going. Picking up more white and creating a much lighter pink now, still quite streaky. And I'm going to run a touch of the Perylene Maroon into the magenta so that I get a nice richer, more orangey and browner colour, similar to what we put on already, but this is going to actually just be on the surface of some of this texture because this is where we have the little florets, and I'm just going to suggest them. Again, hanging down here, we've got lots of lovely mini flowers that are all cascading into each other. So we'll just run them together, and we'll be putting the lighter petals on the outside of this arrangement. But just for here, these little florets are all, this is where the texture comes in handy because it's actually helping me to create that look without too much effort. And so we want some lighter petals now, which are going to be on the pinky side of my mixture here. And we'll create those on top of the light green, stepping out this way. When you need to get the paint down onto the end of the bristles, scrape it off and just realign it so that it's at a useful point on the brush. Otherwise you end up with too much paint high up in the brush and none available to place on the canvas. Okay, so some little bits petal hanging out on both sides of that stem. There we go. This larger petal is looking a bit messy because of all the texture in it, but we'll try and get some form into that. I'm hoping that when I step back from this, it'll all make a lot more sense than looking at it very close up. In some ways, this is a good way to force yourself to get more impressionistic instead of carving out all the details. Down here is not so bright white, so we'll have a little duller. I like that dark from the centre there where the shadows are falling. We need to just temper it with some light on the outer edge of that petal. And then there's some darker reds, which are the little florets. So I'm adding more perylene maroon. And we'll just follow that cascade down here a little more. Some of these branches might be not quite in the right place. Doesn't really matter. I'm getting this suggestion of all of them tangling together. So put a little bit more of that dark colour connecting with the next door flower. And some of the light greens showing through. The stem that bends around at an angle, and then there's a lovely little bloom that comes off it, so we'll just have that looking like that. Right, so the next set of pinks will be through here, and this is quite light. It's showing between the stems, sort of there's a lovely leaf that has a curvy edge on it, and the bloom is on both sides of it. So yes, this is this here, and we want to just have some pinks showing through and cascading through there, not really very well explained by what's going on around it. But we know there's some other blooms lurking in there somewhere. And down here, this one has quite a lot of light on it, at least on the top portion. So we'll allow that to streak down and create a nice gestured sort of version. These petals do have quite a lot of striations in them, which is quite nice for streaking on like that. And you can get a little bit of a suggestion of those veins without drawing every one of them. A little bit more showing through between the leaves there. Seems like you either have not enough rain or too much rain. We've been having quite a lot in the last few days. I'm not complaining, and I know the garden is not, and all the tanks are full. I don't know if I mentioned earlier that we're completely off the grid in terms of water and electricity now. I think I did mention the water heater, but in actual fact, we aside from that, we have no mains water to a hilltop here. So all of us, our neighbours and ourselves, we all collect the water off the roof and feed it into storage tanks and so we save it so that we have enough for the year round for us to use and for the plants when it's dry time. So it's fairly important. And I really can't fathom, you know, in the days to come, years to come, probably it'll be more like months and years, a few years, instead of the long term sort of looking at that we're used to thinking about. There's certainly going to be water shortages across the globe. And so I really don't understand why more people don't take the step to have really good guttering and storage for water. I can't think of anything worse than being without water. Other things you can do without for a while, but you certainly can't manage without water. Okay, adding in a little bit more magenta again. I want to get back to a stronger pink for these lower, but I want it pinker than the purpley colour that's down there. This will also need a bit more light on top of it, but I want to get that strong pink in there. That's really quite a good intense colour on that bloom. Okay, that's sticking out a little bit more than I have it. Excellent. The lower section here is just again where all the little cascades are. They're not fully bloomed out yet, so there's more. They're compact before they're going to stretch out and make longer blooms. It does mean they're quite dark though, so we'll add a little bit more of the perylene maroon into that section. And you can probably see from the reference picture it's quite brownish there and underneath here. Maybe you can hear this thunder rolling in the background, so we're due for some more rain fairly soon. There are quite a lot of darkish pinks hiding around here. Those are the Jacob's coat plants that I was telling you about, which are sitting in our water drain that carries extra water that runs off the driveway safely round out of harm's way. So we'll just plot in a few bits of darkish reds. Again, this is all going to add to the pattern that's being created. Not necessarily putting in details, I just want to put flashes of colour where they arise. I'm going to put in some yellows shortly as well, because there's quite a lot of yellow, strong yellows, which are flowers in between the background, but also they're not quite as acid as this background green. You want to make them a bit more yellowy, like a cadmium kind of yellow. So the next one over, we still have yet to work on this one. We've got that little bit. Let's see, this one should be very much lighter probably. They're not whitish. So the colour I have on my brush is probably good for the slightly darker, pinker petals that are involved in this one. Let's get some of that magenta in there. Again, I'm getting a sticky brush, so I'm going to need to refill, load up my brush a bit more so that it's creamy and not sticky. yeah, I think right now I'm going to change tack and put in some stones and some sky, just so that we can feel out where this is all going to. So, having cleaned my brush, dab on my paper towel. So I want some whitish colours. There's really not much blue in the sky that's showing through between all of these plants. So just give a tiny hint of colour. I'm going to take a little bit of cobalt blue and put it with white in this area here. And we're going to get rid of some of these background greens by bringing the sky in between and showing up some more of these leaves that are quite dominant when they come down. Now on the other side of this, you see I've got an extra branch there, not that it really matters too much. There's a dark leaf there, so let's just outline that as the dark leaf instead. And some bits of light coming through between other leaves, so we'll just hint at those. And some up here. Again, running out of paint, don't want to look scrappy, so we'll pick up more white, touch of cobalt blue, and come back into, this is probably actually the house rather than blue sky, but we'll just pretend that it's visible in the same way. Working my way between the branches, creating some new leaves by carving out leaf shapes out of these, the lighter green. The stem should be there in place, but it isn't, so we'll leave that ready to fill in with a darker spot of colour later. This can be our sky coming back through here, so meet with that branch. I think there should be some more big muddle of leaves there, so we might just put in a couple of splotches of greenery and hope that that makes sense. Down between here there's a little bit more showing through. And then some leaves. We'll just outline that bit of a bloom there. Get some interesting patterns happening where the sky shows through, but we don't want to be labouring this and stressing about whether it's exactly right. As long as we do approximately the right sort of shapes and patterns, it will read as bits of light coming through. We want to sometimes get some continuity on both sides of a twig. Actually, that twig's much too massive. Let's make it narrow. And this, I've got some lights all happening up beneath these flowers here. So I'm going to pretend there's actually a light wall with a pinkish colour to it, which I'm going to pretend is just not there because I don't want to introduce more pink at this point. I want the flowers to stand out as pink. And this layer of bushes is going to be the next thing that we get. So there will be some lights in the bushes. I'm just picking up a little teeny bit of water on my brush to stop it from solidifying. It's beginning to look very messy, so I'm just going to go over a couple of those, make the brush strokes cleaner. Oops. And yes, some light around these. And in between, there's too much there. I want to keep this branch in place. Down here there's some yellow showing through, so we'll add yellow instead of white there. There's a little bit of sense of colour coming through there. Of course, the top of this bush that's growing against the wall is not neat or even, so it's quite fine for that to be messy, and we'll work that out later. So a nice big light green leaf there and some little hints. Okay, I hear the rain setting up to start, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear me over the sound of the rain, so we'll carry on for a few minutes and see how bad it gets. While we're working on the path and some lights, I'm picking up some more whites onto my palette, picking up yellow ochre and raw sienna and making a new puddle over here. Now this is going to be way too yellow, so we'll need to add in some blue to tamp that down, or purple, so that we get a nice beige colour. Don't add the purple first, because you'll probably end up with something way too purpley and have to go back and make some more. So that's pretty much what I just did, picked it up rather carelessly and had more than I needed. So we want more white into this. Going to need quite a bit of this rock colour anyway, so it won't matter too much, and we want to vary it as we go through the painting. So one of the things I want to get in the right place is the main step, and I'm going to create it on top of, it's just kind of the edge here. There's an angle, and then it turns back on itself with a little sticky out piece. These steps were really not made very to any particular design. They're put in because that's what worked at the moment. And this is where the slope of the land goes right up, and our other steps start cascading down from there. So we're just putting in some sense of where that might be, because the texture is going to be causing all kinds of problems there. Now the light portion, I notice, has come mostly across the stepping stones path, so we have a lower indication there, and I think that may help to lead the eye up the path and into some of the bits of lighter stuff showing through here, so I'm just going to hint at some of those. Right, next part of the path, we want this kind of colour to come following through here, so we want to follow it down on this side and on that step that's coming out here, tucking behind these plants. That needs to fade out really, so there we go. Just dragging the colour a little. And here we want a nice crisp edge along here, and then drag it down so that it looks like stones. So good. We have some here. There's a lot of messiness going on here. We'll just add some of that in there. Picking up more paint, I want to keep it nice and juicy. Remixing a little bit. And we'll put in these stepping stone tops. My sense is that I should be working from the top down, but I've got quite a lot of paint on there. Let's hope this works properly. So So this one is going to be, see if we can just get these to sit right without too much fuss and bother. You can see the light parts that connect back into the land a little bit better. Of course they're not level, that goes without saying. They're not expected to be level. Okay, so we now need to do something on the path, the stone wall that's over this side. And of course there's lots of moss and stuff growing in the stone wall. But let's just try and get in some of the, sort of a base of the stone area that we can then add texture and other detail to in a minute. The general idea here is that as you move away from the centre of interest, there's going to be less detail and less, you want everything to be sort of textural and less defined as you move out this way. I'm just pretending that branch isn't there, remember? So if it looks a little more abstract down here, that's absolutely fine with me, because we want larger strokes and less detail at the corner edges of the foreground, since that's closest to you, the viewer. Okay. These top edges of the stone wall, and then we'll have some greenery overlapping that a bit. I think this should be starting to define the view a little better. We need some greys in there now, it's looking very peachy on the wall. Picking up some blue to add into my peachy beige. So that's a much greyer, much bluer grey now. So we'll add some of that into the whole. Notice that a lot of the leaves in this very dark green bush are actually looking almost blue-grey. So, okay, we're pausing for a rain delay. There was a huge clap of thunder a while ago, and I don't like having all of these lights and cameras on when there's thunder around. So I'll resume when the rain's had its little time. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, so I think it's safe to carry on now. Thunder seems to have stopped and some sunshine has come out, although it is still raining. So I'm going to adjust some greens around here. I think I've got some places where we need to add in some more yellowish greens that are kind of dark and murky. So I'm picking up green gold, and I'm going to add in some yellow ochre and some blue, ultramarine blue, just to grey off the strong ochre colour. And quite hard to judge because we know it's going to dry darker, and yet I don't want it to be too dark. Okay, it's a nice yellowish colour that I wanted to break up some of these strong dark lines that are a bit overpowering. And I think I ended up with an extra bit of sky there that's not really required. So we'll just go over that. Back. Some of this needs to tone down a bit, although it's not really dark greens. I want it to be a bit more subtle. There's really no sun poking through here, so I just wanted to come in and make this a bit more uniform. Be alright if some of this texture shows up, creating variety amongst the colours that I'm adding, which is great. Some of these stalks are a little bit wide as well. Need a bit more blue into that because the green gold is quite transparent, so it's not really holding its own at all. Trouble with all the texture when it's going the wrong way, the way that you want. Let's break this up a bit more with some dark. These large dark leaves, I want to be hanging out this way over the brickwork, stonework. And they all have a tendency to be streaking their way back from the undergrowth there, so I don't want to make a big deal out of that. There are some little plants growing there that we won't detail, but just allow them to sparkle through. I've got some, behind all of this, there are some patches of greyish light green. And then of course we've got the leaves that are part of this bush. I think we'll put some greyish bits on the top there. It needs to integrate much better than what we have it at the moment, so this has got a long way to go, this part. But we don't want to make a lot of fuss over this because it's sort of background, and we'll just let it integrate without too much fuss, I think. Greenish patches on the stones around here. Greenish grey, I mean, because they do have sort of lichen and moss and stuff like that growing on them. This dark patch here is some continuation of that. I want to make it just run more into the background. There's twigs and stuff like that falling across it. I want to make it look too outstanding. Greyishness on that one. And then we can put some of that into here. Where the light's catching the grass here and it's getting steeper, I think we'll just use that same greyish light green to suggest that. Sun's actually burning the colour out quite a lot there. There's a lightish green plant that I've just noticed. I'm picking up a light green, adding it into the pale grey, and add a touch of cobalt blue just to tone it down. stuff growing here. Here we see we're starting to use the texture to advantage, where it means you don't have to put in as much detailing because the texture creates it for you. Again, let's mix up some of this into the sunny portion of the lawn. Not lawn really, it's a steep slope. Can't qualify as a lawn. Need a little bit more powerful green. Picking up phthalo green, purple, some cobalt blue, a little white, and then going back into raw sienna to bring the whole thing back to a greyish green, hopefully. Well, we've got a lovely, gorgeous grey at the moment, so let's see where I can use this while I've got it. I think we need some more greys in here. That's showing up some texture a bit better, covering up so much of that light there. And yeah, these stones have a lot of texture on them, so that's all good. Let's put some of these greys into this dark bush. And I think that will help to make that look pushed back and not so important. Need this area to be quite dark under here. I might pull it out as being a leaf, I'm not sure. It might just stay nicely as a grey patch. There's a nice leaf or something coming this way. There's a big patch of texture here and it feels like it should be helping me somehow to do something. So there is a sort of patch of shadow that casts across the bloom there as well, so that would be quite good to have that working that way. And what else do we have? Some of these lights in between here need to be blotted out because it's fairly dense foliage over here, and we just want deeper leaves. These leaves need a bit more green in them, so let's go with the phthalo green, yellow ochre, bit of raw sienna. I really want to take it away from the phthalo colour, and we can use that into these dropping down leaves here, I think, just give them a bit more definition. More generous paint, and some of these should be dropping a bit further too. Okay, I've just messed up the bottom of that one because it had a nice point and now it doesn't again. Okay, that's better. A bit larger. Similarly, I think I just need to make a leaf here somewhere. Hang above those other two, and that sort of takes care of that corner a bit better where we've had to invent something. Just want something to break that line there as well. Make another heart-shaped leaf there. So now we're going to move on to some yellows. And then we'll have a few sparkling lights on the flowers, and then I think that's it. So I'm picking up cadmium yellow. I'm working with the green gold, which has that little tinge of greeniness in it. And I think this should be, let's have a bit more yellow. That should be a nice glowy sort of yellow to just hint at some of these shrimp plants that are behind the pink flowers, which is making them stand out quite a lot. We've got some yellows peeking through there. And through here. It's definitely pulling some attention towards this side of the painting. Show where it's kind of lacy down there. In the gaps here we've got quite a lot of little yellow flowers showing through from the background. I don't really mind if these don't make total sense. Just want to make it a little bit brighter and a little bit more detail around this area so that there's a bit more going on in terms of mystery and breaking up the solid lumps. And definitely we can outline some of these, well, almost outline some of these darker leaves that are dropping down by giving them some little yellows around, in and around the background area. Detailed over there. It's also a bit getting a bit chalky in colour. Picking up a bit more yellow. Trying to work it in with the contours of my own texture, which don't necessarily conform to what's needed in the petals and so on. Okay, stepping back from this just to see that it's reading correctly. I don't want to make too much of a confusion. Some of the yellow flowers in the background. They're quite dense in that bed back there above the red leaved Jacob's coat, I think it's called. Okay, we're really succeeding anyway in bringing forward this side of the painting, which is much closer to us. So. I think I'm being a bit wishful thinking here now with the carving out these details. So I'm going to put back in the stem of this set of blooms. There's a main stem that's running down. So it's a darker red using the Perylene Maroon. And with that, I'm just going to add a teeniest bit of yellow ochre so that it makes sure it's opaque. And we're going to run over this. We had this very light pink version of where the stem was going to go, just so that I could mark where it was. It's time to make that a little darker. and then work out how it transfers through this system of petals. So it comes down to here. Then there's the light petal crossing it, and underneath there we're seeing a splayed out arrangement of the veins that there's also a connecting something that goes over here. And also a darkness that runs through there. Then I maybe should put it back in green, but we'll see if it works like that. And then we want to continue that on down. Part of it comes down this way to connect with this fibre and comes through here. There's another one that comes down off of there. Some of these little florets are showing up more. And this area also needs some of this texture to be highlighted, sort of in the right place. But actually here needs much more of this red colour coming through and tracing back the stem up here. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but okay, underneath of that one looks, I need to pick up more of this perylene maroon, getting a bit pale there. But the underneath portion of this petal definitely needs that red there. And this one too. I'm getting just slightly more sense of the form. These little umbrella-like flowers as they open out. So these dark reddish bits are really, I suppose, the shadows on the blossoms. Stem going up that way. It goes vertically, yes. That's a bit neater. Just need some light on the part of the stones that are catching the light the most, and a bit of bringing out the direction of travel of that lawn as well, if we can call it a lawn. So I'm going back to the yellow I'd already mixed up, and I'm adding in a little bit of the green gold. And I'm probably going to just drag this across so it's not actually creating a very distinct line, but I want it to just catch the sun in some of these areas. Looks like the sun's catching it. And this needs to drag down in front of there we go. It's giving a better impression of the angle that's going on. Yellow with a touch of white over here, and that will really bring up that area, I think. Yes, there's quite a lot of variety going on within the little stones and stuff, making up this bit of rockery. So I can just drag some of this yellow up there. This is helping to create a directional line to lead the eye into the centre of the painting. Give it a little bit more of a break there. It turns to shadow. And then I did promise we'd put a couple more lights on the stones because they've dried off quite dark. So picking up white, I'm going to work on the edge of my yellow patch and the grey patch. I think those colours are pretty much dry, so I'm going to need to pick up a little bit of raw sienna, teeniest touch of blue to go with it to make it into a grey. Let's try it on the top of, yes, that's a good colour. On the top of that section there. Trying to streak it in to get the sense of the fact that it's stonework, and so it's all messy in colour anyway. It's not exactly a perfect colour. It's not a flat, perfect colour. Steps coming down, bits of greenery in between, confusing stuff going on. That sounds like my garden. Just bringing out the edges and a little bit of texture on the top there is going to help to define those, I think, and let them integrate into the background a bit more. Trying to use this up before it dries. Seems to have gotten lost. Okay. Just giving a little bit more light and definition to the sunny parts of this patch of stonework here that's leading up. I'm going to leave most of that very abstract down the bottom there. Likewise, we need a couple of places down here just to catch the light where the stones are in the sunlight. Keeping that very abstract. Let's come right up to the edge of that flower. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it right there. So this is my Medinilla in my Jamaican garden. thank you for watching. I'm going to share my links for my website, and I'm going to share the links for my English website, my American website with the prints gallery, and my painting club address. I'll give those to Chris to share with you properly. And thank you very much for watching. Just going to zoom in so you can see some of the texture here.